Trade rumors are escalating for the Toronto Maple Leafs as a new report from Elliot Friedman has revealed a major trade update surrounding Timothy Lilligren following him being healthy scratched throughout the first 2 games of the season. Want to break that down as well as discuss a report that has come out revealing multiple teams that are interested in the defenseman. So stay tuned for all that in this episode. Before we get into it, quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. If you're a part of the 70 or so percent who aren't subscribed to the channel, it would mean the world to myself and Darius if you could hit that button. As we produce daily Leafs content, this is the place to be, and we will be live tonight following the game against the Pittsburgh Penguins, so make sure to tune into that. And again, thank you guys for your continued support on the streams and videos. But Darius, a lot to go over today. Obviously, Timothy Lilligren was healthy scratched the first couple of games. All signs are pointing to him being healthy scratched once again tonight against the Penguins. And Elliot Friedman came out and spoke out about Timothy Lilligren's future in Toronto and what the Toronto Maple Leafs plans are for the defenseman. Let's just dive right into it here. So you can see this. Elliot Freeman from the 32 Thoughts podcast, he said it shouldn't be too hard for the Leafs to find a team for Lilligren if they were to trade him, given he was a first-round pick 7 years ago and is a right-handed shot, which is something teams always need. It could take 1 or even 2 or more injuries to the Leafs defense for Lilligren to find his way back to playing. He's fallen that far out with the team. Quote, they are definitely motivated to get something done, end quote. So this is very interesting. Obviously, this is the first time that Freeman has spoken out about Lilligren in a little bit here. I want to get your thoughts on this. Seems like a trade at this point is incoming, probably over the next few weeks or so. But the interesting part here is that he said that it could take maybe even 2 or more injuries for him to find his way back in the lineup.
I thought, to me, like, at least through the podcast, that was the most interesting part. That second part there, that second paragraph where he's a couple injuries away from playing at this point, right? Like, we were looking at the depth chart and what Craig Berube has done with the team. If Connor Timmins were to get hurt at this point, because he's going to play, right, until he gets hurt or whatever, until they figure out the rest of the lineup, Philip Meyer is higher on the depth chart than Timothy Lilligren at this point, and Lilligren makes $3 million. So it just doesn't make sense anymore for the Toronto Maple Leafs to have this player. And I saw a lot of defense of Lilligren in our comments on our videos on the channel and obviously on Twitter. And is he a good NHL defenseman? Yeah, like, he's an NHL defenseman. He'll play in the NHL somewhere else. But for the Toronto Maple Leafs, he can't do the simple things. I talked about it on stream the other day, talked about it in our video yesterday, right? He cannot do the simple things that Craig Berube and his system needs this player to do. He can't do it, and he hasn't found it yet at this point. He's not getting into the lineup, and he's not getting into the lineup again tonight. So he needs to find that, and I don't think he's going to be able to within a month, because that's just his game and who he is right now as a player. So I think the most likely scenario is the Leafs move off of him, and obviously we have some interesting locations on where he could potentially go. The Leafs are not going to get a roster player back. It's going to be draft picks. It's not going to be anything crazy either. 3rd, 4th round or something like that. That's what a lot of people are speculating. But at this point, he makes $3 million. He's about 3 guys, and especially when Hakanpää comes back, 3 guys down the depth chart from even getting in the lineup. He makes too much for that. So it's time to probably move off of him.
Yeah, and we'll go into some of those interesting things. But you mentioned 2 or 3 Myers at this point is ahead of Timothy Lilligren, which is a bit surprising. You have other guys. I mean, Connor Timmins obviously won the opening job out of training camp. So there's just a lot of interesting things. And this is something that all of us kind of predicted him to be in that lineup opening night about a month or 2 ago. But there's a couple of things that are circulating. We'll get into an article here now in a second as well. He said, San Jose feels like a clear fit for Lilligren. My next guess would be Winnipeg. Lilligren doesn't have any trade protection. Pionk is a UFA this summer, and Colin Miller is currently their 3rd right-handed shot defenseman. Iafallo is earning $4 million to play in their 4th line. I take him on the Leafs. So there is a world if you shop around enough that maybe you could find another 4th liner, but I don't know if the Leafs necessarily want to mess with that 4th line right now. And they have a lot of depth guys anyway, obviously Lorentz, Kemp, and then of course have guys like Bobby McMahon, Ryan Reeves who are circling in and out. So they seem pretty full there. But for Mark Freitas, 3 trade partners for Timothy Lilligren of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And the first one we'll go over is the Winnipeg Jets. Basically discuss how Winnipeg could be an ideal destination for Lilligren. Strong defensive group, but are slightly aging. And Lilligren will basically give them a high upside right-handed shot defenseman to help replace some of their aging guys as they phase out. And they've had some guys like Brendan Dillon part ways this offseason, or last offseason, I guess, at this point. Sorry. But it's interesting here. And the return would be an Alex Iafallo type. So for the other ones, it's probably going to be trade picks. But for this one, Iafallo could be an interesting target for the Toronto Maple Leafs. I'm curious what your thoughts are. I've seen this going around a lot.
Yeah, I saw it a lot on Twitter, and you just brought up that last tweet, and obviously in this article as well, Iafallo, right? Like, great player, would be great for the Maple Leafs, but with the Timothy Lilligren trade, the dynamic of the trade and the team right now, they cannot take a roster player back. They can't take salary back. The whole point of trading this player is so that on November 1st, when Hakanpää comes off the LTIR and Dewar comes off the LTIR, we don't even know what's going to happen with Dewar either, because the lines are pretty good right now. Maybe they'll keep him around just, in case injuries happen. And obviously, if you move Lilligren's $3 million, it makes life a little more easier. But yeah, you can't get a roster player back. You can't can't take on more salary than what Lilligren's already making. It doesn't make sense because then you're going to have to trade 2 or 3 other guys, right? Because Yarncroke only makes like 1 point something, right? And so you got to think about that, right? So they can't take back any roster players. It has to be draft picks at this point in time, which is why I think some of the other teams are probably better suited, even though Winnipeg probably could use a guy like Timothy Lilligren. Because I'll say again, a lot of people think that I'm hating on Lilligren. He does not fit for the Toronto Maple Leafs anymore.
Yeah, and ultimately, you see here, Iafallo had 11 goals, 16 assists for 27 points. But the roster spot is the biggest issue. Now, maybe they still want to move off of a guy. Now, if they do this trade, they could also potentially part ways with some of the other players they have, whether that's a David Camp, whether that's a whoever else it is, Bobby McMahon. There's a lot of ways they could go about it. I don't think they're going to move Bobby McMahon, but it's definitely even Yarncroc. That's another guy when he comes back that they might debate moving. So if they do make this trade, as of now, it wouldn't make sense. But maybe if they have another trade lined up for somebody else, it could work there. But San Jose Sharks is another team that we've been discussing on the channel a lot, and I mean it makes sense. They're a very young team. They're building around a bunch of their young players, and Timothy Lilligren at this point makes a lot of sense for a team that's rebuilding and wants a high upside right-handed shot defenseman. I've seen on Twitter a lot of Leafs fans out there are worried that they're going to trade Timothy Lilligren. He's going to go out and tap into that untapped potential, and he's going to turn into a guy like Devin Taves that people are, not comparing their games necessarily, but in the sense of they started off slow, they got on a chance to really shine ultimately with him in Colorado, with Lilligren wherever he goes, and then they tap into that untapped potential. So I guess that's the only scary part about this, but a San Jose can make sense as well, especially given their current staff of young players.
Yeah, exactly. They're a very young team, so they could use a guy like this who's a little bit older. And obviously, if you look at Lilligren's stats and his JFresh charts, advanced analytics, everything like that, as you can see right here, he's a pretty good player. He's an NHL player. Like the Sharks would love a guy like this, especially because they're in the middle of a rebuild and retool, whatever you want to call it, because they have a bunch of older guys they're bringing in as well. So the San Jose Sharks could probably make more sense, as well as the next team we're going to get to as well. That would make some more sense. And again, he's a great player. I understand why Leaf fans are worried about that. We saw Phil Kessel leave, Tyler Bozak, all these guys leave and win Stanley Cups, right? And do really well. So obviously you want to keep some of these players, but Lilligren hasn't shown, I think, the fan base as of right now. And obviously Craig Berube, the new coach, who is going to be the coach for the foreseeable future, that he can play in this system, in this lineup. So I don't know if this player works for what the Maple Leafs are trying to achieve with their current roster, right? So that's kind of where I'm lying. I don't think he's a bad player. I think that he makes $3 million. I thought it was kind of puzzling when they signed that contract in the summer, and I thought they were going to trade him right away. And yet here we are. So he makes the most out of anyone that they can trade on the roster right now. So why not trade him? He's a couple guys down the depth chart. They don't believe that he can play in this team's current system.
Yeah, I agree with that. And you look, like the JFresh chart is phenomenal. Always won his minutes last year. Obviously gets taken out in the playoffs for more physical defense. But the last one here is the Dallas Stars, and basically saying that Timothy Lilligren would give them even more flexibility and depth. This one has been said a lot across the NHL rumor list right now. In return for Lilligren, the Leafs can expect a package of draft picks and a prospect. And again, the Dallas Stars make a lot of sense here. I'm curious to see what your thoughts are on this one. I mean, ultimately, any team that he gets traded to, I don't think the return is going to equal the value that he can provide to the other team. So I think at this point, it's going to be hard for the Leafs to win a Timothy Lilligren trade, just given the current framework of the roster and how they do need to get rid of him to a degree, or get rid of some player. And I don't think Lilligren wants to be a Maple Leaf anymore because of the fact he was phased out. And you look at this, it doesn't really help the case. He is an NHL player not getting NHL minutes because of, surprisingly, the amount of depth the Toronto Maple Leafs have at the defense position, especially with Yanni Hakanpää on the horizon of a return over the next couple months or so. So the Dallas Stars, I think, make sense. Any of these teams do, but ultimately, more looking forward to the return, and hopefully it doesn't, it's not too bad for a former first-round pick.
Yeah, and I think when you're looking at Dallas, it might make the most sense, because when you look at a team like San Jose, I don't know if the trade makes sense with Winnipeg. If you look at San Jose, they don't want to give up anybody young or maybe draft picks because they're still kind of up and coming. They're retooling, right? Obviously, they just got the first overall pick. When you look at Dallas, they're a pretty good team. They're going for the Stanley Cup again. So obviously they might be okay with parting with maybe a prospect that wouldn't really hurt the Leafs on the main roster, right? Like you wouldn't bring him to the main roster. Maybe it goes to Marlies or something. And then obviously you could get a draft pick in return too. So that might be the best trade scenario to the Dallas Stars. And they could use another right shot defenseman. They lost 2 to the Leafs this summer. So they could use Timothy Lilligren in that way, but it's going to be interesting. There's other trade partners as well. Like a lot of teams could use Timothy Lilligren, right? He's an NHL defenseman. Just don't know if he fits on the Toronto Maple Leafs anymore.
Yeah, and this is the biggest storyline of the regular season currently, of course, aside from like the games. Outside of that, this has just been what's taken over everything. And one quick thing before we wrap up, this was the final note from Elliot Freeman on his 32 Thoughts podcast. He said, sounds like Toronto is working to find a landing spot for Lilligren. He's down the depth chart, not a situation anyone is happy with. And I'm sure Brad Livin is working tirelessly right now to try to get that figured out. But let us know out of these trade destinations which one you would want to see Timothy Lilligren. And make sure to tune into the post-game stream tonight as the Leafs take on the Pittsburgh Penguins in Kyle Dubas. So thank you guys for watching. We'll see you later.